Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David-Neel, Chapter 3, A Famous Tibetan Monastery. And this is the last part of this chapter. In spite of the part which a conscious purpose plays in bringing about the continuation of a line of tulkus, one must beware of thinking that the composition of the new personality is arbitrarily produced. The determinist idea is too strongly rooted in the mind, even of the wildest Tibetan herdsman, to allow of such an idea. Laws are said to be at work during the whole process, which proceeds according to natural attractions and repulsions. More learned Lamaists hold another view regarding the nature of tulkus. This is, in fact, the only truly orthodox one, which fully agrees with the very meaning of the term tulku. The word tulku means a form created by magic, and in accordance with that definition, we must consider the tulkus as phantom bodies, occult emanations, puppets constructed by a magician to serve his purpose. I cannot do better than quote here the explanation of tulkus given to me by the Dalai Lama. As I have related it in the first chapter of the present book, I met the Dalai Lama in 1912 when he was living in the Himalayas, and I asked him several questions regarding Lama's doctrine, to which he first answered orally. Afterward, in order to avoid misunderstandings, he told me to write a list of new questions on the points which still appeared to me obscure. To these he gave written answers. The present quotation is taken from the document which the Dalai Lama favored me. Quote, "A bodhisattva is the basis of countless magic forms. By the power generated in a state of perfect concentration of mind, he may, at one time or another, show a phantom, in brackets, tulpa, close bracket, of himself in thousands, millions of worlds, in thousands, millions of worlds. He may create not only human forms, but any forms he chooses, even those of inanimate objects such as hills, enclosures, houses, forests, roads, bridges, etc. He may produce atmospheric phenomena as well as the thirst-quenching beverage of immortality." End quote. The latter expression I have been advised to take in both a literal and symbolic sense. Quote, "In fact, there is no limit to the power." No, in fact, reads the conclusion, "there is no limit to his power of phantom creation." The theory sanctioned in these lines by the highest authority of the official Lamaism is identical with that expounded in the Mahayanist literature, where it is said that the accomplished bodhisattva is capable of effecting 10 kinds of magic creations. The power of producing magic formations, tulkus, or lasting or less lasting and materialized tulpas, does not, however, belong exclusively to such mystic as exalted beings. Any human divine or demonic being may be possessed of it. The only difference comes from the degree of power, and this depends on the strength of the concentration and the quality of the mind itself. The tulkus of mystic entities coexist with their spiritual parent. For instance, while the Dalai Lama, who is Chenrezig's tulka, lives at Lhasa, Chenrezig himself, so the Tibetans believe, dwells in Nankai Potala, an island near the Chinese coast. And I'll spell the name of that island for you here. Nankai Potala. The Dhyani Buddha Opadmed, of whom the Tashi Lama is the tulku, resides in the Western Paradise, Nub Deshwachen, Dewacchen. Men also coexist with their magic progeny, King Srong Betan Gampo, and the warrior chieftain Gezar of Ling are illustrations of this. In our own days, it is said that when he fled from Chingatsi, the Tashi Lama left in his stead a phantom perfectly resembling him, who played his part so thoroughly and naturally that everyone who saw him was deceived. When the Lama was safe beyond the border, the phantom vanished. The three men here mentioned are themselves tulkus, but according to Lamas, that circumstance does not preclude the further creation of emanations. These spring from one another, and there exist denominations for emanations of the second or third degree. And there's a footnote here. And it says, Young Tulka emanated from a tulku. Guam Tulka emanated from the tulku of a tulku. It may happen that the self-same defunct Lama, multiplying himself post-mortem, has several recognized tulkus who are contemporaries. On the other hand, there are Lamas who are said to be tulkus of several entities. Before dismissing the subject, it may be interesting to remind ourselves that the followers of the Docetae, Docetae sect in early Christianity looked upon Jesus Christ as being a tulku. They maintained that Jesus, who had been crucified, was not a natural being, but a phantom, created to play that part by a spiritual entity. So also, in contradiction of the Orthodox tradition, which tells that the historical Buddha Gautama is the incarnation of a bodhisattva who came down from the Tushita heaven, some Buddhists have affirmed that he who is the real Buddha was never incarnate, but that he created a phantom which appeared in India as Gautama. In spite of the various more or less subtle theories held about tulkas in learned Tibetan circles, they are considered for all practical purposes as real reincarnations of their predecessors, and the formalities regarding their recognition have been devised accordingly. It happens not unfrequently that a Lama, often himself one of a line of tulkus, foretells of his deathbed, the country or district where he will be reborn. Sometimes he adds various particulars about his future parents, the situation of their house, and so on. Contrary to the opinion prevailing in the southern schools of Buddhism, Lamas believe that a certain time of undetermined length elapses between the death and the birth of being on the earth. In the interval, the main consciousness, that which causes the rebirth, is wandering in the labyrinth of the Bardo, seeking its way. As a rule, it is about 2 years after the death of a Lama tulku that the treasurer, the head steward, or other clerical officials of his household begin to look for his reincarnation. By that time, the child who is that supposed reincarnation is usually 1 or 2 years old. There are cases when reincarnation is delayed, but these are very exceptional. If the late Lama left directions regarding his rebirth, his monks pursue their researches accordingly. If such directions are lacking, they resort to a Lama tulku astrologer, who points out generally in veiled and obscure sentences the country where investigations must be made. and various signs by which the child may be known. When the tulku to be discovered is of a high rank, one of the state oracles may be consulted, and this is always done for the reincarnations of the Dalai Lama and the Tashi Lama. Tashi, Tashi. Sometimes a young boy is quickly found whose birthplace and other characteristics answer the direction given by the late Lama or the astrologer. In other cases, years elapse without finding anyone, and some incarnations even remain undiscovered. This is a case of deep sorrow to the devotees of the tulku, and still more to the monks of his monastery, which, lacking its worshipful head, does not attract the same number of pious benefactors, suppliers of feasts and gifts. Yet, while some lament that sad plight may be a cause of secret joy to a cunning steward who, during the absence of a legitimate master, manages the business of the tulku estate on his own authority and may thus find a way to make his own fortune. When a child is discovered who nearly answer the prescribed conditions, a Lama clairvoyant is again consulted, and if he pronounces in favor of the child, the following final test is applied. A number of objects such as rosaries, ritualistic implements, books, teacups, etc., are placed together, and the child must pick out those that belonged to the late tulku, thus showing that he recognizes the things that were his in his previous life. It sometimes happens, when several children are candidates to a vacant tulka seat, that equally convincing signs have been noticed concerning each of them, and they all correctly pick out the objects owned by the defunct Lama. Or it sometimes occurs that 2 or 3 clairvoyants disagree among themselves as to which is the authentic tulku. Such cases are rather frequent when it is a question of succeeding to one of these grand tulkus, lords of big monasteries and large estates. Then many families are eager to place one of their sons on the throne of the departed grandee, which brings with it consideration and material profit. Generally, the parents of the tulku are allowed to live in the monastery till the child can dispense with his mother's nursing and care. Then a comfortable lodging is provided for them on the monastery land, but outside the Gompas enclosure, and they are plentifully supplied with all they need. If the monastery has no special mansion reserved for the parents of its grand tulku, the latter are well provided for their own home. Beside a grand Lama tulku, who is the lord of the monastery, the Gompas often include several other tulkas amongst their members. In the largest of these monastic cities, their number may amount to a few hundred. Some of them rank high in the Lamastic ecclesiastic aristocracy, and in addition to their seat in the parent monastery, their own mansions in other Gompas and estates in Tibet or Mongolia. In fact, to be near relative, or even the least of them, is a connection profitable enough to rouse covetousness in the heart of any Tibetan. So, countless infragues, infrigues, infrigues, are woven around the succession to a tulka, and amidst the warlike folk of Kham, Kham, or the northern borderland, bloody feuds spring from the passionate competitions. Countless tales are told throughout Tibet about extraordinary proofs of memory from previous lives and wonders worked by young tulkus to testify their identity. We find in them the habitual Tibetan mixture of superstition, cunning, comedy, and disconcerting events. I could relate dozens of them, but I prefer to confine myself to the relation of facts connected with the people who I have personally known. Next, the mansion of the Dalai Lama, Pegyai, in which I lived in Kumbum, was the dwelling of a minor tulka called Agnai Tsang, AgnaiTsang. And then there's a footnote that says, not to be mistaken for Agya Tsang, the grand tulku already mentioned. Okay, so this is Agnai Tsang. 7 years had elapsed since the death of the last master of the place, and none had been able to discover the child in whom he had reincarnated. I do not think that the steward of the Lama's household felt greatly afflicted by that circumstance. He managed the estate and seemed rather prosperous. Now, it happened that, in the course of a trading tour, he felt tired and thirsty and entered a farm to rest and drink. While the housewife made tea, the nirpa, or steward, Nierpa, the nirpa drew a jade snuff box from his pocket and was about to take a pinch of snuff when a little boy who'd been playing in the corner of the room stopped him and, putting his small hand on the box, asked reproachfully, "Why do you use my snuff box?" The steward was thunderstruck. Truly, the precious snuff box was not his, but belonged to the departed Agnai Tsang, and though he had not, perhaps, exactly intended to steal it, yet he had taken possession of it. He remained there trembling, while the boy looked at him with his face suddenly became grave and stern, with no longer anything childish about it. "Give it back to me at once. It is mine," he said. Stung with remorse and at the same time terrified and bewildered, the superstitious monk could only fall on his knees and prostrate himself before the reincarnated master. A few days later, I saw the boy coming in state to the mansion. He wore a yellow brocade robe, and he rode a beautiful black pony, the nirpa holding the bridle. When the procession entered the house, the boy remarked, "Why do we turn to the left to reach the second courtyard? The gate is on our right side." Now, for some reason, the gate on the right side had been walled up after the death of the Lama, and another one opened instead. The monks marveled at this new proof of the authenticity of their Lama, and all proceeded to his private apartment where the tea was to be served. The boy, seated on a pile of large, hard cushions, looked up at the cup with a silver gilt saucer and jeweled cover placed on the table before him. "Give me the larger china cup," he commanded, and he described one mentioning the very pattern that decorated it. Nobody knew about such a cup, not even the steward, and the monks respectfully endeavored to convince their young master that there was no cup of that kind in the house. It was at that moment that, taking advantage of an already long acquaintance with the nirpa, I entered the room. I had heard the snuff-box story and wished to see for myself the remarkable little new neighbor. I offered him the customary complimentary scarf and a few presents. These were received with a gracious smile, but apparently following the trend of his thoughts regarding the cup, he said, "Look better, you will find it." And suddenly, as if a flash of memory had dashed through his mind, he added explanations about a box painted in such a color which was in such a place in the storeroom. The monks had briefly informed me of what was going on, and I waited with interest to see how things would turn out. Less than half an hour later, the set cup, saucer, and cover was discovered in a casket that was at the bottom of the very box described by the boy. I did not know of the existence of that cup. The steward told me later on. The Lama himself, or my predecessor, must have put it in that box, which did not contain anything else precious and had not been opened for years. I also witnessed a much more striking and fantastic discovery of a tulku in the poor inn of a hamlet some miles distant from Ansi, A-N-S-I. Roads going from Mongolia to Tibet cross in that region the long highway which extends from Peking to Russia over a whole continent. So I felt annoyed, but I was not astonished when, reaching the inn at sunset, I found it crowded with visitors from a Mongolian caravan. The men looked rather excited, as if something unusual had just happened, yet with their customary courtesy, still increased by the sight of the Lamaist monastery garments, which Lama Yongden and I wore, the travelers immediately gave up a room for my party and made room for my beasts in the stable. As Yongden and I remained in the courtyard, looking at the camels of the Mongolians, the door of one of the rooms opened, and a tall, handsome youth, poorly clad in a Tibetan robe, stood on the threshold and asked if we were Tibetans. We answered in the affirmative. Then a well-dressed, elderly Lama appeared behind the young man, and he also addressed us in Tibetan. As usual, we exchanged questions about the country from which we came and where we were going, and the Lama said that he intended going to Lhasa by the Sukho winter road, but now he added that it was no longer necessary to take this journey. The Mongolian servants who were in the courtyard nodded their assent. I wondered what could have caused these people to change their minds while en route, but as the Lama retired to his room, I did not deem it polite to follow and ask exclamations that were not offered. However, later in the evening, when they had inquired about Yongden and me from our servants, the Mongolians invited us to drink tea with them, and I heard the whole story. The handsome young man was a native of the far distant Nagari province, Ngari, in southwestern Tibet. He seemed to be somewhat of a visionary. At least most Westerners would have described him. But we were in Asia. Since his early youth, Migur, M-I-G-Y-U-R, this was his name, had been restless, had been haunted by the queer idea that he was not where he ought to be. He felt himself a foreigner in his village, a foreigner in his family. In dreams he saw landscapes that did not exist in Nagari, sandy solitudes, round felt tents, a monastery on a hillock, and even when awake, the same subjective images appeared to him and superimposed themselves on his material surroundings, veiling them, creating around him a perpetual mirage. He was only a boy when he ran away, unable to resist the desire of finding the reality of his vision. Since then, Migur, M-I-G-Y-U-R, had been a vagrant, working a little here and there, on his way, begging most times, wandering at random without being able to control his restlessness or to settle anywhere. Today he had arrived from Eric, A-R-I-C, tramping aimlessly as usual. He saw the inn, the encampment of the caravan, the camels in the courtyard. Without knowing why, he crossed the gate, and he found himself face to face with the Lama and his party. With the rapidity of lightning, past events flashed through his mind, and he remembered that very Lama as a young man, his disciple and himself as an already aged Lama, both on that very road. Excuse me. Oh dear. Both on that very road, returning from a pilgrimage to the holy places of Tibet and going home from the monastery on the hillock. He reminded the Lama of all these things, giving minute details regarding their journey and their lives in the distant monastery, and many other particulars. Now the aim of the Mongolian's journey was precisely to beg advice from the Dalai Lama as to the best way of discovering the tulku head of their monastery, whose seat had been unoccupied for more than 20 years, in spite of persevering efforts to find his reincarnation. These superstitious people were ready to believe that the Dalai Lama, through his supernormal power, had detected their intention and out of kindness had caused their meeting with the reincarnated Lord. The Nagari wanderer complied immediately with the usual tests, picking out without hesitation or mistake among a number of similar objects those that had belonged to the late Lama. No doubt subsisted in the mind of the Mongolians. On the morrow, I saw the caravan retracing its steps, moving away to the slow pace of the big camels and disappearing on the skyline into the Gobi solitudes. The new tulku was going to meet his fate. And that concludes Chapter 3. Chapter 4 will be called Dealing with Ghosts and Demons. Oh my. So I must apologize for my rough voice, but I am getting over a cold, and yes, till soon.